I have a legendary show today with a member of Vercel, and we're going to talk about the AI SDK and how this can actually unlock really amazing and exceptional user experiences for your AI apps. So today I have with me Nico. Hey, Nico, how's it going? Welcome to the show.
Hey man, it's going very well. I think a little bit colder here in London than it is for you in Hawaii, but I'll be just fine.
Yes, no, I'm so delighted to have you. We're literally covering so many time zones here. I have to wake up super early. It's about 7 a.m. And I'm just really happy to have you here because one of the things that really kind of blew me away while I was at the Next.js conference was the fact that you did this really great presentation about the AI SDK. And it's like open source, and it's a way to actually make your AI apps responsive in these different ways. And part of my background is just, having worked with UI and UX experiences on mobile. It's like I'm learning more about web frameworks, and what you were showing was like a level of detail that I haven't really seen in other frameworks. And this is just getting started, and it's continuing to mature. And some of those things included like some structured execution or structured extraction, some generative UI stuff, and some Zod schemas and validations. And so if this sounds like French or if this sounds like another language to you, don't be put off by this, because we're going to try to approach this a little bit from a like sort of beginner or whatever. I am still early and still learning Next.js as a programming language, but I come from the client-side world. And so what I want to do is try to maybe help you as a user explain some of these processes. And I'm actually kind of coming in from the top down. And when I say that, I'm coming in more from I pretend to be a user. How would I use these devices, and what are those types of things and experiences that I can kind of tighten up to make my apps just that much better? And the way that we can do that, is like by looking through the documentation. But really, who has time to look through all this documentation? It's too much, right? So we can speed that up by having Nico here. So yeah, now I'm really excited that we're going to be able to kind of cover some of these topics here about, how do you talk to a language model? How do you get that information from a language model? And then once you have that, then how do you combine that into some type of UI experience? And so we're going to walk through a series of code and some slides, and this is going to be really highly interactive. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the actual comments and reactions. So that way I'll slide you right in, just like Pulp ML here, and also Hertzfeld Labs. That's awesome. Thank you, Hertzfeld, as well. So yeah, without further ado, thanks, Nico.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you for having me here. This feels really fun as well, and it was really fun to finally meet, because I think we've known each other for almost like a year now on the internet.
That's right.
And so it was really cool to finally meet you and meet like Mickey and Dravia and all the other guys at NextConf. But yeah, thank you for having me. What we want to do today is go through a bit of an introduction to the AI SDK.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a strict agenda for this, but we were going to take, as you had said, a bit of my workshop that I had given at NextConf, which was talking through how to build an AI app. And so we're going to go through and hopefully learn a bit of this through actually coding and building some cool stuff. And with that in mind, I have about like 4 or 5 small little projects that are split across a few different areas that we'll use. We'll start by building a few terminal programs just to understand how to call the model programmatically, or call models programmatically. Then we'll look at something I really like called invisible AI. And these are features that leverage AI to improve existing applications that aren't just chatbots. So these can be things like linear automatically generating the title of an issue from a Slack comment or something like that.
Wow.
Or even Figma allowing users to search for assets based on what they're looking for, not necessarily like what the file is named. So these are like quality of life improvements that aren't AI applications. You wouldn't even really know it was AI if they didn't tell you, but certainly make using the application as the developers intended as simple as possible. And then last but not least, as I think you mentioned, we're going to be looking into actually building a chatbot and looking at generative UI as well, and how we can give the model the ability to effectively go beyond text and actually generate interactive components.
That's
So yeah,
excellent.
does that
Super
sound
cool.
good?
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm ready for it. If you're ready for it, make sure you drop a like. Drop a comment as well while we're watching this live. And also, if you leave any comments on YouTube, I'll work through afterwards. If you're just watching this on the stream after, I'll be up in the comments, answering questions as well. And then if you're on X, feel free to interact, share this with some friends, let people know that this is happening, because this is going to be a great working session. It's kind of rare that we can actually, work with someone who's on the inside working on this type of stuff and has just a breadth of knowledge to share with us. So I'm super delighted. So yeah, if you want to start with the screen share, and then I'll be able to pop that into the screen here, so we can do the thing.
That.
And so
Classic thing you're supposed to do beforehand, right?
it's okay. Like it's all pretty fast here. So once we get this set up, so that's how you know this is live, my friends. All we do is we only push to prod. That's all we do.
on Fridays.
On Fridays, yeah,
nights.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what we do. So yeah, before we go into things, I do want to make sure that people are aware of our documentation. If you do love reading documentation, our docs are at sdk.vercel.ai. And in here, we've got a bunch of awesome guides alongside like templates, which we can talk about a little bit later. But what we're going to do today, as I mentioned, was we're going to focus first on building a few little projects to understand the SDK. Now, you may know Vercel from Next.js, a popular web framework built on top of React. The AI SDK is something that we built as we were building V0. I'm sure viewers of the Ray Fernando stream would be familiar with V0, as I know you've used it quite frequently. But if you haven't, it's a fast and fun way to build applications just with natural language. But in trying to build this product, we ran into some issues around a nascent tooling ecosystem. And they're really focused around three primary areas. One was that interacting with models was typically done using the library of the model provider. So if you're using OpenAI, you're using OpenAI's library. If you're using Anthropic, you're using theirs. And this is great. Like that library is tailor-made for that model. But with the speed at which these models are coming out, if we wanted to test out how Sonnet 3.5 V2 worked on our application that was using 4.0, we would have to rewrite the entire application, which isn't really feasible. Additionally, as well, we started to see great use cases internally for using multiple models from different providers for different tasks. So you might use like Gemini's Flash for classification tasks because it's so cheap and so fast. And you may want to use Sonnet because it's great at React or it's great at writing. And so obviously maintaining two different libraries for these different tasks just isn't a great scalable solution. So right off the bat, one of the big things that the AI SDK provides is a unified API to be able to call any of these language models. So we have these concepts of providers. These are like language model providers. So you can think of OpenAI, Azure, Anthropic, Bedrock. And the idea throughout this unified API, if we go to just the overview here, is that we provide this way of calling the language model where if you want to switch between models, all you have to do is switch out a single line of code. A single line of code, not counting the import, as these are ballooning out. And this is really powerful because it allows you to really easily experiment across different models, but really easily build an application that can scale, and scale not only in terms of size, but also in terms of like time. As you go 2, 3, 4 months down the line, you have an API that is intended to work across all of these providers. So we support a ton of providers at the moment, and also provide this the entire library is free and open source beyond just this provider model. But as a result, we have people from the community building community providers for whatever provider that they want outside of whatever might be our first party, like core team supported providers that you see up here on the left. So sorry, that was problem number one, and I'll go through this as quickly as possible because building is a lot more fun. But it's helpful to have this in mind when you see some of the design decisions that we took on the API. The second point was around just wanting something that was TypeScript first. Like most of the tooling was Python first because that is where the research for the models was being done. And obviously, knowing that we were going to build V0 with Next.js, we wanted something that was built, tailored from the ground up to work with Next.js and work with TypeScript. And importantly, work also in any Node.js environment, as we'll see in a bit. And then the last thing, which is a nuanced but important point, is that AI brings a ton of new challenges from a UI and product perspective. And those are namely, we don't know exactly what the model is going to give us. It's non-deterministic. And also, when we're dealing with streaming, we don't know how much of what we want it's going to give us in every chunk or every piece that it's giving us. So we have this novel difficulty of how do we render the information that we want the model to generate within the UI. And so those were the three main things that led us to building the SDK and the three main problems that we've, I would say, really been focusing on heavily from a DX and a product perspective with this. So with that out the way, I think
Yeah, that's
I can
very
finally stop.
handy context for everyone who's listening, especially if you're going to be rewatching this later on, because I kind of want to have this serve as something that you can go back and reference. For me, I have sometimes a lot of difficulty scanning through documents and just kind of having that perspective. That was kind of one of the first things I had to kind of digest around. It's like, okay, what does it look like when I want to test a different model? Another thing that I've been kind of realizing is that when I'm starting to prompt models, I was basically taking the prompt approach first. So I'll just prompt my code and then later go back, try to understand it. And I didn't really understand what the AI was walking through. So this perspective is going to actually help you as a user prompt better, because once you understand the structure of how some of these frameworks work like this, the power is then unleashed because you can use those right keywords, like you're saying, like models, one of them, providers are one of them. In this specific context, the language model is going to now know that you want to deliver something with the AI SDK, and you're like, I want a Google provider. And it's going to go grab those bits of information. So that way, when it crawls through those documents, it's going to make it easier for you. So it has both purposes. You're going to need to do this if you're just going to code yourself, but if you're also using AI to assist you with code, having this context, just like with the way Nico was explaining, is going to be very helpful. So if you want to go back later into the stream, you're going to be able to just go back to the YouTube part and just kind of re-listen to that section. It's going to be super handy for you. So just kind of keep that in mind if you're a person who's just prompting. It may sound like word salad to you, but just kind of picking up on those terms is going to be helpful. If you're a little more advanced, you're going to be like, okay, cool. This is a really cool framework. I want to check this out and have some fun. Because I do come from the Python programming background as well for writing tools and various things, and so this is part of the reason why I said, hey, let's go play around with Next.js. So this is great. Yeah.
Cool. And yeah, I'm going to keep this really high level and not dive into one of the things that I quite enjoyed doing for the session was a very, very, very brief introduction to like language models and to prompting, because I talk from experience of kind of ignoring that for the first few months of building applications. Like prompt engineering, that's a meme, right? Like people are getting, you're just talking. If you can communicate, that's fine. And it kind of highlights a funny thing in that most of us struggle with communication. And so when you put this into the context of working with language models, it's one of the reasons why you hear a lot of people say, oh, ChatGPT is a fad. This AI stuff is never going to change. And other people saying like, it's really changed my life and it's changed the way that I work. And because it's a tool, and like any tool, you need to be intentional with how you're using it, with the strategies. And this sounds kind of like mumbo gumbo a bit, but it is, I highly suggest going through our foundations section, just so that you have this as like a foundation The last thing I'll say with prompt engineering, which I like to think about, is it's a little bit like a chef approaching trying to cook a meal with bad ingredients. Like if you start off with bad ingredients, it's more than likely you're going to end up with a bad meal, no matter what kind of pampering you do to the meal, both presentation. And it's the same with being considered, communicating clearly. Yeah. So I think that's good. I think that's enough of me rambling with just a blank website in front of me, and we can maybe get to
Let us cook, my friends. Let us
building.
cook. Let's go. If you're ready for this,
So
drop some likes right now in the stream. So hit the likes in the stream. If you're rewatching this, just hit the like button. Share it with a friend. Tell them like, yo, these guys are about to cook, and it's about to go down right now. So of course we have to pop in like the code editors and just let us know kind of what you're using right now.
sure, yeah. Code editor up here. This is Zed. You can use anything you want. I really like Zed. But what we've got here in this project is a Next.js project, and we've got a few like basic packages configured right off the bat. So we do have the AI SDK set up, which is this package here. We did manage to get the AI package on npm. So installing is as simple as npm. Oh, that was just my my API key, which I'll have to comment out later. Let's see if I can open that without throwing that away. Good job, Nico. That's a good start.
YOLO.
So the AI package is installed just with npm AI. Then we've got here our first provider, and the provider we're going to be using in this project, which is the OpenAI provider. We've got a bunch of Radix UI dependencies, which we'll see later. And this is for ShadCN, which we have set up already. If you don't know ShadCN, it's a very configurable component library that uses Radix UI primitives under the hood to give like an awesome building experience with Next.js. And what's really cool is V0 knows ShadCN really well, so you can prompt for buttons and things like that and immediately pull that out and put it into your code. But that's me getting distracted. A bunch of other things for Next.js and Tailwind, and then finally Zod, which you had mentioned briefly before. And Zod is what we're going to be using for constraining or forcing the model to give us back what we want it to give back. So cool. Those are the dependencies. The first two things that we're going to be looking into is actually some terminal programs. And this is for me, one, to show you how you can start thinking about calling a language model programmatically rather than like in a UI from like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever that may be. But it's also to stress that the AI SDK runs in pure Node.js environment. So you could run this in GitHub Actions. You could run this literally on servers wherever you want and treat it like any other asynchronous API that you would be calling. So the first file the first use case that we're really going to be looking into is a really cool one, quite a basic one, but that is giving the model a bunch of some kind of material and then asking a question on it. Pretty straightforward. And throughout this, to kind of save me from having to type everything over and over again and be able to explain all of it to you, I'm going to be copying and pasting the code that we're going to add from a little companion site that I pulled together. But hopefully great. This gives an opportunity for less typing and more actually talking and understanding.
If you want to just pop up the font, maybe +1 or 2, or see if it can, yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think there's some folks who are on their phones trying to read this as well, so like it's just that's perfect.
I get you.
Just a little bit smaller. Yeah.
So
cool.
Let's start off with like what we're actually passing the model, and this is Silicon Valley. We are talking about AI, so what better than the founder mode, the infamous founder mode essay from Paul Graham? So we're going to be giving the model. The intention is to give the model that essay, which we're pulling out just with the file system package from Node. And then right now, all this script is doing, if we were to run it with pm extraction, which is just going to run the script, it's going to pull out the first 100 characters of that essay. So let's look at what we're going to do. The AI SDK has 4 main functions, and we're going to focus on the first one. One of the great things about the SDK is that the naming has been very simple. So to generate text, you use the generate text function.
Nice.
So we're going to import that from the AI package. Now, we talked about providers. The first thing that you need to do when you're calling any language model with or using any AI SDK function is specifying the model that you want to do, that you want to use. Sorry. So in this case, we're going to want to use OpenAI's GPT-4o, which, if I can hide this out the way, GPT-4o. Great. I skipped a step. GPT-4o Mini, sorry. We can update that for the next one. The next thing that we're going to do is pass a prompt. And a prompt is just like anything else that you've been using on ChatGPT. That's just telling the model what you actually want to do. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to pass a prompt saying extract all the names mentioned in this essay. We're going to add 2 blank lines, and then we're literally just going to pass in the essay as a string. The final thing that we're going to do is we are going to log out the result that it generates. So I can now copy this over, save the file, run the script again. And in a second, we should see the 4 names that are mentioned in the essay. This is like obviously really simple, but imagine trying to write an algorithm for like pulling out names. I don't even know if there's a regex that can like pull that kind of thing out, but
that's amazing.
This is something that with something like GPT-4o Mini is literally negligible from a cost perspective, is pretty fast, and gets us exactly what we want. And to prove that, we can go into the essay and look up. We've got Brian Chesky here. Who are the other ones we had?
Ron Conway.
Ron Conway, right? There he is.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs. Yeah, there he is. And then John Scully. Yeah. So just like that. It's kind of this is really simple, but this already communicates to me, okay, you could just like play around with this and ask it what to do. So for example, let's maybe change up the prompt and have something maybe a little bit less defined and something a bit more arbitrary, like what's the key takeaway in 50 words. Now, this is interesting because a key takeaway in 50 words is something that likely would take me quite a while, because you're going to have to read through it first, maybe read through it again, and then think about, I wouldn't really be thinking in 50 words. I'd probably break it down into a couple, but we can literally run this one command, and then we'll have out this summary in 50 words. Brian Chesky's talk highlighted the distinction between founder mode and manager mode in running companies. Founders often receive misguided advice to adopt a managerial approach, which can hinder their success. Understanding and embracing founder mode could lead to better outcomes, as evidenced by successful founders navigating this challenge. So cool. Like,
that's amazing.
I mean, again, I like to pause. This may seem silly to pause at something that seems relatively simple in what's happened in the last 12 months, let alone like the last 2 months. But this is something that we're doing, just like simple node environment, passing an essay and like just asking what to do and getting exactly what we want.
Yeah. So somebody asked, would that be viable for like, a huge 100,000 line type of text, or would RAG be better?
RAG would probably, like anything, it depends. The answer is not great. And this actually highlights a great thing, is that there's no right answer to any of this stuff. If anybody says that they know, they're wrong, because this stuff is one, every model is different, has different characteristics, obviously with different parameters, is going to respond differently to different inputs. But I think depending on your use case, yes, and it's worth experimenting with. Like anything, giving a whole huge like amount of text is going to, and forcing the model to point and find something in a pinpoint location is going to be less effective than necessarily giving it just the relevant information and asking it to synthesize an example. Like there is that, it will be obfuscated a little bit by being surrounded in that.
That's true. And part of the reasons why I kind of wanted to have this talk today about the AI SDK is because of that providers thing that you exactly said. How quick that you can change out a model or maybe run two calls at the same time that can then run the extraction and then you can compare the results yourself. I think those are like having a framework that can do that for you, that like you don't have to rewrite the structures of your prompts and then type in, oh, this is model this. Oh, this one always needs temperature or else it's going to fail. Like just those types of things are just kind of the bane of your existence. So we're going to probably get into a little bit more of like how that provider thing looks like. And this is just a really good example. That's a great question. Because now we start getting into like the technicals of the RAG technicians and people who are trying to study this as an actual like serious field. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And I think when in doubt, like this is probably the most overblown cliche analogy now, but thinking of these models like very, very smart interns with zero context on a certain task. And so they're very capable. But equally, if you don't give them instructions or you make things somewhat obfuscated, as I was saying, you're reducing the likelihood of getting the outcome that you want. And at the end of the day, this was something that I mentioned the in the session, which sounds a bit obvious when you say it and you think about it, but language models are trained on insane quantities of text to be able to generalize patterns in language, to be able to take a certain input and basically predict what is the most likely from that. And so we can use that understanding to guide how we're prompting to say, okay, if we want the model to do something, like give it an example of what it is that we want, saying like key takeaway, it's likely that, or summary, it's likely that the model has this concept of summary in its training data in many places. And so it's a way of the model insinuating or implying what the task it has to do is.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Yeah, no, some great questions. And yeah, keep the comments coming, people. And as we go through different things, we're gonna kind of cover some of those. That's so cool.
And so on that vein of testing and experimenting, I do suggest, like as we're doing in this next step, switching up to maybe a bigger model. So before we were using 4.0 Mini, if we instead look at how 4.0 would respond, we can see a thing difference. And in this case, we get the key takeaway is that conventional wisdom of scaling companies, blah, blah, blah. The interesting thing I want to highlight here is that 4.0 picked up that this was akin to Steve Jobs' methods. So really picking up on like the subject that wasn't necessarily mentioned by name in each of the examples throughout the essay, but was the subject introduced at the beginning of the essay and then alluded to or implied that these were things that Steve Jobs did throughout it. So this is more of a more accurate takeaway, both in terms of details as well as like kind of cues that weren't necessarily stated. So just another reason to test, play around, experiment with all of your functions and all of your use cases, because you never know which model is going to give you the output that you're looking for. You may not want you may have preferred the 4.0 Mini, and that, but you just need to experiment as much as you possibly can.
That's cool. That's cool.
Cool. So that's the first one. I hope to show you how simple this is. I mean, this is 18 lines of code where I would really say that only, what is it, 8 of them are really the AI SDK logic, but to have the model give us what we wanted to get, which I just want to emphasize how this API has been made to be as simple as possible and as akin to programming patterns that you're already used to. So like this is awaited like any other fetch call that you would have to an asynchronous API. and it's intuitive. Okay, I tell you the model that I want to use, I give you a prompt, and I'm going to get out a text generation. There's no I'm thinking about this in AI because it's completely different. You rely on primitives that you and programming patterns that you already understand. So cool. The next use case I'm really excited to go through, and I'm excited to go through this because this is something that we actually have in production at Vercel. And this is taking a bunch of unstructured information and being able to classify it to be able to do something with it. And our use case here is that if folks are familiar with Next.js, it's a very popular web framework. And in being open source, it gets a lot of issues in GitHub every single day. And there's actually there's a relatively small team of people that are managing those issues, and those can pile up very quickly. And so what the team built, and shout out to Sam Coe who built this, was a way of running each support request through a language model to be able to pull out a few structured categories. Okay, is this a feature request, or is this a bug, or something like this? And then be able to imply things like severity and other things like that to then trigger automations. So sending a Slack message directly to the person, or triggering a zap, or whatever it may be. This kind of thing leads to us having a much shorter time between these issues being presented and being resolved.
That's very cool.
What I want to do here is show you this, but in a very controlled environment. And this is going to introduce us to a few of those structured extraction things we were talking and you were mentioning at the very beginning.
Let's go, folks. If you're ready for this, hit that thumbs up right now. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on X, definitely retweet and tell a friend, because we're about to get deep right now. So stay tuned, my friends. Yes, let's go. This is the stuff I've been waiting for.
This is the stuff you enjoy. This is the stuff that really blows me away. So I'm excited to share this with you guys. So what we've got here is a very authentic JSON list of issues for a fake SaaS company. So each issue has an ID and some text. In this case, it's I'm having trouble logging into my account. Can you please assist? The export feature isn't working correctly. I need help integrating the API, things like that. So we've got 7 of these. And so in our TypeScript file, we're just importing in those support requests. And then as it is right now, we're logging out the first 2 items. So if I run this script with as so, you can see we're pulling out those first 2 support requests. So like last time, we are going to first try using generate text. And the idea here being very simple, we were able to before take an essay, throw it to a language model and ask it to do something. Let's kind of try and do the same thing and see what happens. So what we're doing here is we're importing generate text, and we're importing OpenAI, the provider. We're calling generate text again, specifying we want to use GPT-4 Mini. And then we're passing a prompt that says classify the following support requests. We're giving the model the categories that we want. So we're leaving very little up for the model to insinuate or imply from the response. So we're saying these categories are limited to billing, product issues, enterprise sales, account issues, product feedback, two new lines, and then we just stringify those support requests and pass it to the model. The very last thing that we're doing is we're going to log out the resulting text generation. So if I copy this over, paste it in, run the script again, in a second, we should see, depending on my Wi-Fi. Oh, there we go. Let me zoom out a little bit because I think the formatting's a bit messed up. But you can see that the model responded. Here are the classified support requests. Number 1, account issues. I'm having trouble logging into my account. Can you please assist? It also passes in an ID, and so on. It goes through all of these. And what's cool is that these are correct, or how I would approach categorizing each of these issues. But this isn't really usable as a format. So what could we do here? Also, let's keep in mind that the model has also done the classic thing of telling us what it's actually going to do, which I think we all know the all caps, like please only respond with JSON, please, please, please. So we could do that. We could do that and then maybe write a parser or something like that. But I don't really want to do that, and I think it would take a little while. And instead, this is where we can introduce the second AI SDK function called generate object. So again, with the simple naming conventions, this function literally generates structured objects. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy over this text. All that's happening here is that we changed from generate text to generate object, and we also changed the function we were invoking. And then finally, instead of logging out the resulting text generation, we're logging out the resulting object. And I can bump this font up again. But you'll see we have an error. And the reason we have an error is that we haven't told the model what we want it to give us. So we need it to generate an object, but we haven't told it. So what we're going to have to do is define what's called a schema. And if you're familiar with Zod, you'd be familiar with this like idea of schemas. But basically, Zod is this incredible, I'm the biggest Zod fanboy. It is a TypeScript library for effectively defining these schemas with a really nice ergonomic syntax. So to define an object, you use the Z class, and then you use the object function. And then within there, you can define any key you want. In this example, if we want to think about what we want the model to return, we want it to return an array of have the request, which is what the person had asked for, and then a category. And this should be the constrained category that we had provided in the prompt before. So let's copy this code over. And I think our errors go away. And if we run this in the console, let's see what happens. Okay, kind of progress, I guess. We got 1 instead of the 7 that we were supposed to get.
Yeah.
But we did get the correct thing for that one. And we did get the, we got the correct category, which is really cool, and it's constrained. But this isn't what we want. How can we fix this? Well, we could go in and update this schema to be an array of these objects, but the AI SDK actually has an output mode that we can set on the object, on the generate object function, that allows us to tell this generate object function whether we want just like a single object or we want an array of the object schema that we've provided.
Wow.
So by adding this one key, keeps jumping, but you'll see that we've added just this one key right here, this output array. If we save the file, head back to the console and run it again, and it will take a second because it's doing 7 now, you'll see that we have those 7 requests in this structured JSON, this structured object, which is actually an array, nicely to go. And to prove that it is nicely typed and ready to go, we could go through here and say, let's check the first object that's in, let's check the first element that's in this object. So if we say result.object and take out the first one, and we see that it's typed, it has a category and a request. And if we look at the category, we can see that category has literally constrained to exactly those types. So if we wanted to surround this in parentheses and like make some kind of condition here, say we want to check if category equals bang, we've got IntelliSense all lined up here, which is like this alone is such a game changer for working with models. And what's going on behind the scenes here is not only is the AI SDK providing that schema to the model to say, please, please, please return it in this format, it's also parsing the output and sending it through Zod so that if the model's output doesn't meet the schema that you pass in, it throws an error. And so like you don't have to do any part. You know that we can be guaranteed that this category is one of these 5 options because it's already gone through a Zod parser to ensure that it actually has this option and it's one of these potential values. So this is like, this already, we've solved that, like kind of that problem number 3 of how do we know what exactly is going to come out. And we haven't gotten into streaming yet, but this is hugely this is a game changer for working in these kind of smaller use cases. So you could imagine, for example, like mapping through each of these elements in the object and saying, if category equals this, send it to Slack, or do something else. But what I'd love to convey here is that it's kind of the same way you would think about doing this if you just sent it to an API that was doing this in a discrete manner. Sorry. So yeah, this is really cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. I just kind of want to see if we can kind of digest that a little bit.
Take a pause there if you've got any questions.
Yeah, so to just digest that a little bit for those who are maybe watching kind of on the earlier stage and maybe not completely understand, like especially Zod, if Zod is kind of new to you, like at a very high level, what you're saying is that I have an app and I give it these prompts and I give it these really long prompts to try to generate stuff and try to say, oh, don't say this, but say this, or here's an example of a structured output. Can you just give this to me? So instead of just trying to tell the model that you should do things, I should just kind of let the model be free, let it do its analysis and let it spit out, certainly I'll be happy to help you in whatever XYZ things it wants to tell me before the output comes out. I could take this and I'd say, okay, now I want the data structured in a very certain way. So I'm going to just import Zod and I'd select my little schema array that I want the data to be presented in. For example, YouTube timestamps. I want a schema that's going to say, here's this first thing I wanted to say as far as like a string, and then here's this nested array to look for these like specific timestamps looking like things with this other text next to it. So if it spits out anything like that, and if it says this extra stuff, Zod is just going to go ahead and like get the output from the AI and then put that in and format it. And if it doesn't come out with that formatting, it's going to throw an error saying, hey, your timestamps didn't resolve or something like that. And then kind of just at a high level, that's the way that you want to think about it. So I was just thinking about this more of like, if you're architecting an app, the reason why you would want to use this is because you want this type of structure to be available. So in your user interface experience, we're kind of building that base here. It's like, make sure you have the data, make sure that consistency is going to be there, and that you're going to be able to handle that on the way up in the stack, so that when you present something to the user, it looks more complete, not just kind of like, these extra fluff, or sometimes you don't know what's going to come back. So I think this is a huge unlock for me. And I think that's just kind of where I had that like, moment and stuff. So that's cool.
Yeah, it's really, it's pretty unreal. And we're kind of getting into where it starts getting even cooler for me, which is as you're iterating. I will sound like a broken record as I continue to repeat this, but with these, when working with AI, you're never done. You've never got the perfect prompt. You've never got the perfect logic. You're always doing more. You're always trying to see how you can improve and modify to get a better output. And one of the really fascinating things, or really exciting things of work in this way, particularly with Zod, is when I want to add a new feature. Like I mentioned before, how we have had the model try and infer urgency from these issues. I think previously the way you'd go about it is you'd probably go back to your prompt and you'd start to you'd want to add in some way. Okay, we're also wanting to infer urgency. This is how you should think about inferring it, and so on and so forth. Instead, when you're iterating with this structured object format with Zod, it's really as simple as just like adding another key to your schema. So in this case, if we want to pull out the urgency, we say, please return another key for urgency. And we're using this enum type to, again, constrain the possible output options that the model can give us. So if we were to update this and say, we now want the urgency as well, save this file, you can see we've just changed that right there. If I clear this up and run it again.
And part of the reason why we're wanting to extract the urgency is because in our prompt earlier, we told it to give us some urgency values in its output, right?
No, and that's kind of the crazy thing.
Wait, hold up,
we've
what?
just said classify the following support requests. And that's what's
Oh,
really cool about this, is that we're not this could probably get a lot better by providing a system instruction. And system instructions, if you don't know, are like character instructions for the model, like you would give to an actor to say this is who you should be. So you'd maybe add a system instruction like, you are an expert in customer support. Like, yeah, Copilot's
yeah.
already. So you'd add something like that, so it has an idea of how it should behave. But no,
Whoa.
we didn't have to change the prompt at all. All
You're
we did
kidding.
is we say we now want this urgency key as well. And then we want the model. We tell the model you can respond in 3 ways: low, medium, and high. And if we look at the output, we can start to see what the model was doing. So we could say, like, in this case, the dashboard's not displaying real-time data. How can I fix this? And what's interesting is that it's cited this as high. Now, taking this a step further, you could add something like maybe urgency reason and say that this is, this is a string. And in fact, we're going to put this a little bit, we'll put this before, and let's see what happens here. In this case, we want the model to describe why something is urgent before actually tagging it as whatever urgent thing it should be. And so in this case, the dashboard's not displaying real-time data. It says that this is medium urgency because the user is experiencing a malfunction in a product feature which may affect their workflow. Instead, a user inquiring about support options would be more low because it's not to do with like their current use of the product. This you could obviously improve with adding to the prompt, but it's a really like it's a really
That's
cool way of working with this, where you're just
mind
adding
blowing.
keys to get more out of it. And
Okay.
in this case,
Wow.
extending your ability to use this information massively with just one additional line of code.
Wow. Wow. So just to summarize, we didn't change anything in the actual like text prompt saying, I
No,
want you to pretend to be a magical wizard who understands this really obscure thing. We just said, here's a schema of kind of what I want. Um, and then before we have the urgency, like think of everything kind of as a line by line processing step. So in that next step, which is going to be urgency, like if we add something just above it to give it a reason, then that has a better sense of how it's going to output the next step below it. So think about these like kind of as chains of information that's kind of flowing through, but it just kind of all happens at once with these like AI systems. That is
and
awesome.
that's a really important point that you mentioned, which is I did it without mentioning it, and is why you saw the model's urgency reason change. Um, and that is, you can improve classification like this by forcing the model to first actually write out the reasoning behind it. As a result, it's deducing this urgency reason, or this actual like urgency value, the reason that it writes out above it. So you can think of it like the way that humans would approach in general, um, thinking about something complex like why something is urgent. You'd be more likely to get to the right outcome if you thought about it first and then you decided, rather than just deciding straight up.
Very cool. Very cool. Wow.
So we have, I think, one more. Yeah, yeah. So this is really cool. Um, a lot of this stuff makes me giggle a lot because I just kind of can't believe that it works in a lot of cases. And that is, a lot of these models, you'll have to test this out depending on the model you're using, but are multilingual by default. And so this is another step forward for how useful this can be. I've prepared beforehand a version of these support requests in a bunch of different languages. So we got German, Spanish, I think this is Chinese and Japanese, and then Italian and German again. So we can literally change just the JSON file that we're importing, keep everything else the same. And the only other thing that we'll do is add a key to the Zod schema saying language. We're not telling it actually much beyond just saying you should return a language. And we're going to try and see if the model can infer, one, the language that's being spoken, but two, also like directly return us accurate information across across all of those support requests. So if I save this file again, we'll clear the console and run the script again. We should see in a second exactly the same output that we had before in all of these different languages with the correct language being pulled out. So Japanese being pulled out, German being pulled out, Spanish. But this highlights an interesting issue, which is when I say language, I'm thinking Spanish, not ES. I'm thinking Chinese, not ZH. How can we tell the model what we want it to do on this level of a key? We could maybe go into the prompt and add to the end of the prompt, when you return language, make sure it's the full thing written out. But we can actually use one of Zod's core functions that it provides, which is chaining a describe function. And this is really cool. It allows you to describe these keys in line, what they should be. And this is extra context that's going to be provided to the model on the level of the key. So in this example, we could say for the language, the description of this key is that this is the language the support request is in. And then we give it examples. And this goes back to what I was saying around language models generalizing patterns in language and figuring out the most likely output based on a given input. If we give it examples of what we're looking for, we're going to give it the best chance of giving us what we want. Wow. So if we go back to the file, copy all of this in. Again, I've just added this describe function here. I'm going to run the script again. We should now see the language is returned exactly in the format that we were looking for. So really, really, like, again, really, really, really cool. I think we lost Ray for a second. He's probably answering the door. Let's see where we're at next. I think that's all we wanted to go through on Zod. I may stop for questions here if anyone has any questions, but I don't think I can see the questions. Well, we'll crack on with the next section. And this next section brings us into something people and I've liked to call invisible AI. And this is, as a concept I introduced earlier, these features that are backed by or powered by AI that just make your application better for your users to use without them even knowing it's really AI. So these are things like generating titles for linear issues, as I was mentioning. By the way, Ray, I don't know if there were any questions about the last section. I kind of just like stopped over it. I'm happy to answer any questions if there were, because there was a lot there.
Oh, no, I think there was, if anyone has them, please drop them in. I think people were just really excited about, like it's this GPT-4 Mini is really good with all languages. Yes, that's why it's really kind of nice to experiment with these different models and kind of take a look at these different things. And as far as like other people that were saying things, that people are pretty excited about just building with the frameworks and people who come with a Python background. The water is warm over here, and it's kind of one of the reasons why, I picked Next.js. It's like, oh, this is a really detailed framework. There's a lot of stuff you can do. I want to build better experiences on the web, and I kind of want to, really trying to start to deliver these types of things and think about things differently than I did before. And so, how nice to have a really simple framework to describe, data structures, and then give it just some basic descriptions to extract out these little pieces of data. And these are just some of the beginning nuggets to start really exploring as a developer and kind of getting into those documents. And there's a lot of rich documentation there, and I'm really excited to have Nico on the stream today, because it's like, for me to learn something, I like learning in person or going to someone and just sitting in their office, and it's just the way that I've learned growing up. And so by joining the stream and doing this here, it's kind of like we're hanging out together. You get to ask us questions. We're live. It's so cool. And it kind of felt like that way at the conference. I could talk to people, share my experiences, and kind of talk back and forth. So just super honored to have you here sharing some of this stuff. It's like literally like interrupting you during the keynote live. It's so cool. So
I love it, man.
Yeah.
this stuff, like I said, it makes me, most of the time it makes me giggle when you're playing around with this. You're like, no, that's not going to work. That's okay. Wow. All right. Move on. That
It's
was easy. Like
powerful.
go
So
on. So
fast. Yeah.
I, these models, this will go to, if hopefully we have time to chat through the use case that you were talking about. But one of the, and that use case being like working with models where, okay, we're giving, in these cases, 7 support requests, but what happens when you're giving it 7 million and all of this kind of stuff, and or 7 billion lines of whatever these things may be. And I think it helps to think back of, these models aren't, we haven't hit AGI yet, and like keep that in mind when you're working with these things. These models have their limitations. They're incredibly good when you use them intentionally, and that's what I'm trying to showcase in a lot of these scenarios, is be realistic with what you're asking the model to do. If it's great at understanding patterns, give it something with the pattern that you're looking for it to replicate, and you'll most likely get out what you want out. And we'll see, as we're going through this idea of breaking down big tasks into smaller tasks that are likely, that the model is likely able to complete as we want, rather than saying like, one shot, can you build Facebook for me, and like add Stripe and like payments and AdSense and like all that kind of stuff that is not very reasonable, that even like I wouldn't be able to do that. So asking a model and to do that and being disappointed when you've got to approach a lot of these use cases knowing where you can leverage the best part of it. And that's what I want to show, in, funny enough, in these next few little projects.
Let's
So
cook. Yeah. So if
moving,
anyone's watching the stream,
yeah,
definitely give the thumbs up. Share this with some folks. And prepare any questions that you may have, because this is your chance to ask them live as we go through them. So yeah, I'm really excited for this next section here.
cool. So this next section is going to be focused. I think we might just do one of these, just knowing time. We'll do one of these invisible ones, and then we can move into the chatbot, because I think a lot of people like the chatbot a lot, and then we can leave time for questions. But I do think this invisible AI stuff is really cool. So the feature that we're going to focus on right now is something that I think everybody wishes was in every application, every social application they use, and that is, um, I think everyone has once had that scenario where you come back to your laptop, you look in Slack, and there are like 6,000 messages that have come in since you left your machine. And you'd love for that one thread that is 300 comments long to get an idea of like, what happened, what do I need to know, and what's going to happen. And I saw um, the Brian over at Campsite build this feature into their platform and do an awesome demo on Twitter, showing how this wasn't marketed at all as an AI feature. It was just like, oh great, now you get summaries of comment threads if you want. And so we're going to try and replicate that feature as well. So the first thing that we're going to do is run the dev server, and we can use that with pm run dev. Head back to the browser. I'm going to run these side by side, so hopefully we can get things looking big enough. Oops, that's not what we wanted to do. /summarization. It's this one right here. So what we've got here naturally is a comment thread that has been generated by AI, because why not? And in this comment thread, it is a bunch of folks working at an agency that are giving or discussing an update on a certain client project. I think there are 20 comments in here, and I don't want to read that. But naturally, given I've done this demo, I can tell you exactly what's going on. They're talking about the client being happy with the changes that they're making. And some people are going to be working on some part of the project so that they can prep for a meeting that they're going to have. But again, we don't have time to read through all this. We'd rather just have one button that we can click right here. And when we click that one button, we should be able to just push out a summary. And what's cool here is that this is going to build upon what we've learned before. And that is, okay, we've got a bunch of kind of unstructured information. Let's send it to a language model and ask it to summarize what happened. So that's exactly what we're going to do. And because we're using Next.js here, we're going to, let me see if I can pull this over. Yeah, that looks good. We're going to be using server actions here as our server side environment. So before we were using just Node.js, now we're going to use server actions as like our pseudo API routes that we can call directly from our front end. And if you've never worked with Next.js or never worked with server actions, think of them as just, this is server side code that you can call directly from your front end. So they're really, really cool. Highly suggest playing around with them if you can. So the first thing we're going to do is create this actions.ts file in this summarizations folder. And in here, the first thing is we are going to mark it. We're going to use the use server directive to communicate to the next compiler that this is indeed a server action. We're going to then import the generate object. We want to generate some structured information here. And the reason why we're going to do that rather than just text is because of a problem that we saw before when working with Node.js, when the model sent us back like, here is what you asked for, and like text after. We don't want that. We just want exactly what we want. So we're going to use, we're going to define an asynchronous function, just like any other JavaScript asynchronous function. It's going to take in an array of comments. We've typed this as any just because the type we don't really know, but in your application, you'd probably want to type that. And then we call the generate object function and return the resulting object. So if you remember from before, from our previous things, this looks a lot like the main function, literally the function called main in our other files, where it's asynchronous. It calls whatever AI SDK function, and then it returns resulting generation. So I'm sounding like a broken record here. We're using an AI SDK function. We got to tell it what model we want to use and then what we want it to do. So that means giving it a model, this case GPT-4 and then a prompt. In this case, we're saying, please summarize the following comments. And then we have a separator, and then we have a label saying these are the comments, and we stringify those comments. Finally, because this is a generate object, we're actually going to have to give it a schema. We got to tell it what we want it to do. And so for our summary, we want it to have a headline. This is like, okay, top level, what happened? Context, what prompted the conversation? Discussion points, what did they actually talk about? And takeaways, who's doing what? So I think all we have to do now is copy this code, paste it in. And then we're going to be heading over to our root page. So our server action is done. Our AI code is done here. So if we open the file browser, open the root page, and look at what we have to do. Well, the first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to pull in that new action that we defined in the file right next to this. And then we're using a really cool trick for typing the state. So we're going to have to assume you were working with an asynchronous API here and you're fetching data and then you want to do something with it in your UI. You're going to fetch it and then probably set the state locally so that you can then send that as props into another component. And we're going to do the same thing here. Typing, I'm actually, even though I kind of sounded like I don't like, I love TypeScript so much. And this is one of the coolest TypeScript little tips, which is there are two utility classes you can use called awaited and return type. And if we pass in the type of the generate summary action that we just passed in, it will literally type this state as exactly whatever you return from the action. So if we were to change our schema in the generate object, that would obviously change what is returned in the resulting object, and that would update our type of our state automatically. So this is just like really handy for as you're building your applications, not having to
That's beautiful.
to manually type things everywhere. And I'll show you.
I like that explanation. I think there are people who are new to TypeScript and don't understand kind of what that means. And sometimes like
Sure.
just you explaining this was super helpful because they would probably just go create, or have the AI go create another type file, and put that in your types.
Sure.
So then you're managing a Zod schema with types. And it's like, no, that's already built into your Zod schema. And then with the server action, when you're pulling that
Exactly.
in,
So if you see here,
yeah,
we created in this action, right? This resulting object is of type this object that has a headline string, context string, discussion point string, takeaway string. And if we go into our action, all we're doing into our page, when we're passing this, we're using a generic here. And generics, long story short, they allow you to modify the type effectively that will be returned. It can be used under the hood, but you can think of it just as a way to decorate what is going to come out. And in this case, we are passing in the return type of that generate summary action. And what that gives us is this summary state locally in our component that is exactly typed to what we had in the object. So just to prove this, like if we got rid of that takeaways and we went back here, you can see that summary now doesn't have that takeaways type in there. So this is really helpful as you're building and iterating, obviously changing up this schema a lot to not have to change it up in a lot of places. And you don't have to completely understand generics. That like you could just copy that code and reuse it. Like don't be too intimidated by it. It takes a while. Trust me. I'm like years into trying to figure it out, and I now feel like I get it and I love it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
so
saves
that's
you
a
years.
tangent.
Yeah, yeah. This is so cool. This is why we do these streams. It's just kind of fun to get in more detail and talk about these extra stuff. So I love geeking out on this.
So what we've done here, all we've done here is we've created a new state variable to hold the summary that we expect to be created from the action. The next step that we're going to do is we're actually going to call the action. And what's really cool here is, again, this is an on-click handler that you would use in React, where it's asynchronous. We're setting the loading state as true. We're then generating the summary with that action. We're awaiting the result and then sending that result into the set summary state call to update our state to the result of the generate summary action. So this could have been on 3 lines, but it's just on 1 line for brevity. But importantly, like we're using it like any other asynchronous action that we don't have to. We're not thinking about streaming yet. We're not. This is just a normal asynchronous function. So cool. We've now generated that summary, updated the state. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to want to render that in the UI some way. And we have a summary card component that we want to, after we click the summary button, it should take the summary that's been generated and pass it in as props to this summary card component to show our summary. And this summary card is something I created on V0 very quickly. And if we look at what it accepts in, it takes in a headline, discussion points, takeaways, and context. So the same thing that we had defined in our action. So I think that's all we need to do here. We can save both of those files, head back to the browser, and click the summarize button and see what happens. Moment of truth.
Uh-oh. YOLO, everyone. It's
YOLO.
happening. This is live.
Is it going to work?
Yeah. Do you have the internet? Is your key still working?
Okay.
Oh, wow.
There we go. So now we've got a summary. But it's not very summary-y. Like it's pretty long. It kind of feels as long as the thread itself. So this is where we head back to our best friend Zod and our best friend the describe function with Zod, and we give the model a little bit more context on exactly what we want for each of those keys. So let's head back down and see what we're doing. We're going to add descriptions to each of our keys, both telling the model what we want, as well as giving it an indication of how much of it we want. Now, Zod has some constraining functions like .length, so we could constrain the number of characters that we want. But these are guidelines rather than like actual constraints. I just want the model that when I say max 5 words, it's going to interpret, okay, this isn't a lot. This is a little bit. Whereas when I go below and say, what is the relevant context that prompted the discussion, max 2 sentences, it knows, okay, that's a bit longer. And so that's the theme throughout. We give it some more context, but we also give it an indication of the length of what we want it to do. So I think that's all we
Someone says
need to
add
do to
emoji.
update this.
That'd be funny.
So again, this is a change that we've made. We've just said exactly what we want and constrained in quotation marks, because it's not actually going to fail if it doesn't meet those constraints. It's just an indication.
Oh, okay.
So if I go back and just click the summarize button again, and maybe you can see the resulting summary is a lot more what we were looking for, right?
Wow.
The headline, this is client feedback and next steps. The first point, the team discussed the client's positive feedback on the latest design. They addressed the need for an updated timeline and software license. And this is the thing that blows my mind, is that we have in this describe function for the takeaways, we say, what are the key takeaways? And I said literally 2 words, include names. And what it's pulled out is exactly who is going to be doing what. And that to me is just like
air horns.
what?
Yeah.
Right? That's what you want when you see all of this. And yeah, we could even have it like add an emoji as is it Matachek?
Yeah, Matachek.
Terrible at pronouncing names,
let's
but we could have it like.
Let's do that. That'd be so cool. Can we do that? Let's have some fun.
See if we can
Why not? I mean, this is the whole point.
Emoji Z.
Let's do it live.
Emoji. Or no, we're going to describe this and say the emoji that best represents the summary. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like Copilot, take the wheel, right?
Yeah.
And now the only thing that we'll have to do is go back into our summary card, and we're going to take in an emoji, which is a string.
Nice.
Emoji. This could be easier if I like did that same trick here.
Oh, I see.
And then let's add that emoji here. Emoji.
Aloha,
this might
Libra.
fail right now because we don't have,
insert air horse sound. Let's go.
Yeah.
Oh, it has like
so there you go. We got a phone. We got a phone. I don't know. It's not it's not really the best, but you can see how this kind of thing, how easy it is to iterate. Like emoji, we added it in 2 seconds. So it's really, really powerful iterating on these things.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fun as far as like how you can think about things and just how you can actually use these types of ideas. And you have free reign. I mean, this is, just watching you do this is just like, there's just so much knowledge distilled down into this. Even just from your demonstration, it's like, okay, how would you add the emoji? Where do you go in these types of things to add that? And that's kind of the big advantage for me of like, to go from building from Python apps to the Next.js apps, to think about user experiences, right? So, you have all this data, I want to do something cool. And then how do we get that data and then actually extract that out into a user experience here? So then it makes it more fun. You want to have your app, branded in that sense. Like if your brand is emojis or certain types of things, you can do that, and provide those types of experiences that just kind of make it more like feature rich, which is super awesome. And yeah, we're literally just scratching the surface. I feel like here, this is just amazingly cool. Wow.
Yeah. And what I want to emphasize, now that I think about it, I've said I've want to emphasize everything because there's a lot to think about. But the fact here is that AI can be very scary from an app development perspective because it's this black box that you don't really know what's coming out. But with this workflow, you're able to bring some level of determinism to both the expectation of what's coming out, but also the building process. So we wanted to add an emoji, and you add it in your Zod schema, and then you pass it in as a prop, just like you would pass in discrete data that you were getting from an API. It's once that clicks, your iteration process as you're building this application becomes really fun. I can't think of a better word to say other than fun. And you can build some really things that you never would have thought were possible just by adding simple keys. So anyway, I'm waffling on this because I really like it. But,
well, I think where it leads us into is kind of like the next step, like with the chat app, and then also maybe some generative UI stuff in the future, is that, okay, so now you have something, you can define a system where you send it off to an AI process of some sort. It does its little magical things and it comes back. And then you can have some deterministic thing to draw UI for you. And so just think about all these different things. Like imagine if it came back with a fire emoji or like 3 fires or 5 stars, or, you can just give rating systems kind of as things go. It's like, how challenging is this problem? Oh, this is 3 stars or 3 fire emojis. And then, instead of ranking from low, medium, high, you could just literally just do like emoji based, give me 3 emojis with a fire if it's like a really high priority. And, it could just, you could just have fun with it. And I feel like that's kind of where you're going, and it's beyond, beyond the language, but then it's in a structured way where it's repeatable. And going back to the first part of this, is like starting off with those providers. So in the AI SDK, how you can then select multiple providers. You can do 2 different runs if you wanted to do at the same time, and then do that same process and return the results, 2 different results, and then you can compare them on the screen. You may have seen that if you're ever chatting with ChatGPT, it'll say, hey, this result or this result. They're probably doing the same query, and they return back and showing you side by side so you can compare it. So just kind of getting you to think about these things as they're being built. That's cool.
And so keep in mind, we've also only looked at 2 functions in the AI SDK so far. We've looked at generate text and generate object. There actually are only 2 other core functions, and the only difference for those 2 other core functions, there's stream text and stream object. And you probably guessed it. The difference is that they allow you to stream the information or the data back, which is really, really powerful, and what we're going to look at next. So I think we're going to skip over I had one other invisible AI, but we're going to skip that, and we're going to go right to the chatbot so we can start looking at building a chatbot, and then probably the most powerful primitive, which taps into, I think, Matichek's or agents. We're going to look into tools or function calling, as a lot of providers like to call it, where things really start to get pretty nuts, where the model interacts with the outside world.
Very cool.
So, sound good?
Sounds good. Let's go. Let's cook.
All right, let's cook. So, excuse me. We're going to build a chatbot now. So let's head back to the editor. We can close all of these files off, and I'm going to head into this 5th one here. So what we've got so far, the dev server is still running, just Next.js app, and we've got a route @/chat. And in this route, let's see what we've got. If I can type /chat. All right. Very, very compelling start to our chatbot. I think this is an H1 maybe no, it's just a div. It's a div that says chatbot, and that's my TED talk, everybody. That's how you build a chatbot. No, so we're going to go away from server actions for this part of the demo, and we're going to look at route handlers. The AI SDK has a few libraries, but has a powerful primitive for building chat interfaces on the front end, and it's called useChat. And useChat is a hook that manages. Well, actually, I don't want to get into that complexity yet. Let's first think about what is a chatbot. You've probably used ChatGPT. You've used Claude. The rough process that happens is you've got an interface with a text box, a list of messages above. You send a message. Claude is thinking, or something. V0 is thinking, and then a response is streamed in incrementally, and you're seeing these characters, tokens, as they're coming in to the screen. So this introduces a new primitive for us to look at, and that is streaming. Now, streaming sounds kind of simple at the face of it, but it's really complex under the hood, in the sense that you are opening a request with a server, and then you're just starting to send a response back. And when we're thinking about adding language models to the picture, it's not the most straightforward thing in the world. But we've built this useChat hook that abstracts a lot of the complexity of handling this streaming, and it's built from the ground up to be working with route handlers or API routes. And one thing to stress here is that useChat works across all major UI frameworks. So we're using Next.js today, but it works with React, Svelte Kit, Vue, Nuxt, Solid, like all the logic and the way that we build this is applicable across all of those frameworks. But what we're going to start with are the route handler or the API route. And this is our server-side environment where we're going to call the model. We're going to ask it for something, and then we're going to send that response back. So let's create our first file. Now this file is going to be in this root directory. It's going to be api/chat/route.ts. And in here, we've done this for Vercel. Vercel is a serverless platform, has functions that run for specific period of time as they're invoked. And by default, on the hobby plan, the duration that they can run by is 10 seconds. And a lot of the time, AI models, language models, need more than 10 seconds to generate a response. And so on the hobby tier with Vercel, you get up to 60 seconds for free. And so you can set that with just using this export const max duration. I tend to set it to 30 just to, like, it's a nice middle ground. Yeah. And so that's what we're doing here. And then with Next.js, you can define a post API route at a given route. So in this case, it's at /chat. And then by defining the action that you want in all caps. So in this case, we're exporting an asynchronous post request here. We are then going to, remember, when we think about building a chatbot, we're going to have messages, right? And those messages are going to be coming over the wire. So we're going to pull those off of the request body. And then we are going to see the stream text function for the first time. So this stream text will look very familiar to generate text in that we first define the model that we want to use, but we're now seeing, instead of defining a prompt, we're seeing a messages key. And we can use either messages or prompt depending on the use case. In this case, because it's a chatbot, we're going to be wanting to send in a list of messages rather than like a long string with all of the messages concatenated, or just like a single request. And actually, we're using this convert to core messages function. This is no longer necessary, which is really cool. I think this is using old dependencies in this case. But if you're building with this right now, with the latest version of the SDK, you won't need this convert to core messages utility function. But we'll leave it in for now. The very last thing, which is usually quite a complicated consideration, is like, okay, great. We've got our streaming text response from the model. How do we prepare our route handler to actually send all of that in a streaming response? And this is where this awesome function comes in on that response, which is the toDataStream response function, which will literally convert that into a data stream response that we can then pull in on the front end. So a lot of complexity just abstracted away, but still giving you the power to do with it as you please. So we are going to add that to our route handler and save the file. Now, next up is actually using this useChat hook. Because we're using a hook, we are going to mark the page as a client component. We do that with the useClient directive. We then import useChat from the AI React package. Remember, I said that if you're using Vue or Solid or Svelte, you just import this from /Svelte or whatever UI framework you're using. Then one of the really cool things that useChat does here is that it manages the state of the conversation for you. So in this case, we're going to pull out this messages object, which is just a stateful variable that as we send a new message, it will be appended to that messages array. And then as a new message is received from the server, it will be incrementally like streamed in, but streamed into that messages state, which is really, really cool. So the way that we would use it is that we destructure it from the hook, and then we map over those messages. And then we check if we render a certain markup depending on whether it's the AI saying it or whether it's the user saying it. So that's rendering our messages. And then the last thing, right, we need a form. We need to actually be able to have a way to send something to the model. And what's really cool is that the the useChat function abstracts all of this away as well. So you can destructure the, let me give more space, the handle input, the input value, the handle input change function, and the handle submit function. And we just attach these to the onSubmit form handler, and then create a new input where we also attach the onChange handler and the input value. And it will manage both updating that state and triggering the form submission and appending new messages as well. So if I copy this over back to our page, our beautiful chatbot, and now we head back, we should see something that looks kind of like a chatbot. So we could say, hello from Next.js.
Wow.
And just like that, we've got like our kind of ChatGPT moment of a streaming response in. So really, really quick, really easy. But obviously, this is not what you're shipping to production. But I want to take a bit of a pause to look at something that we haven't looked at yet, which we mentioned very briefly, and those are system instructions. And this is like these character instructions that you can give to the model to influence the way that it's going to behave. And these are really powerful. A lot of the times you might be using these to keep the chat bot with your brand, to say you can only talk to people like this, you can only do that. But there's a really cool example in here that I'm going to skip over to this example, which is, I'm a bit of an Apple fanboy and a early like computing history buff, let's say. And I was just playing around with these system instructions and asked the model to say, basically give the instructions, you're Steve Jobs, assume his character, both strengths. Actually, let's copy this in and so we can see it in the editor. It'll be easy. Yeah, here we go. So you're Steve Jobs, assume his characters, both strengths and flaws, respond exactly how he would in exactly his tone. It is 1984. You've just created the Macintosh. So three line prompts, or 3-line system prompt change. And let's do something like asking the model, who is Bill? And I like this because if we asked ChatGPT, like, who is Bill? This is Claude, but it's going to say like, oh, okay, it actually did pick up Bill Gates.
I wonder if you ask it a lot of times.
If we got rid of, let's say we removed, better test is if we remove this system prompt here and ask, who is Bill? Bill can refer to a number of people, right? Model kind of doesn't really know. But the moment that we add this system prompt back in and we say, who is Bill?
Or we can also ask, who's John, like John Scully?
Bill Gates, he's the guy running Microsoft, and he's been a bit of a competitor, to say the least. We've had our differences, but he's undeniably smart. Like, this is crazy, right? It's in his tone, it's in his voice.
That's right.
It's got his. I'm sure he's said a lot of this kind of stuff, and so you can have a conversation with Steve Jobs, like.
Tell me about John.
Let's say something.
John Scully.
Like,
yeah.
What about who's John?
Yeah. Who is John? See if it's
with the H or without the H?
I think it's with the H.
It's with the H. But let's just say our relationship has been complicated. We have different ideas about where Apple should be heading, and it's been a bit of. And this is crazy because this would be before the ousting, right?
Right.
And so you get this character you can talk to, and this is more of like a fun anecdote of what you can do with these models. But you should play around with it because, I mean, imagine you've got Steve Jobs that you can just ask questions to. Obviously, it's not, but I think it's incredibly powerful, and to show you the power of system instructions with, in this case, just 3 very clear instructions of what it should be doing. But anyway, that was a tangent off to the side. We now get to move to something a bit more interesting. And we're going to remove that system instruction. We're going to ask the model to do something that I don't think it's going to be able to do. And that is asking something about the world. So let's say, what is the weather in, where are you in Hawaii again? Remind me.
Kailua.
In Kailua. Did I spell it right?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Kinda.
Yeah. Yeah. That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, it's still, I didn't save my root. That's the problem.
Whoops.
What is the weather in Kailua?
Yeah.
So I'm unable to provide real-time weather updates. For the current weather in Kailua, I recommend checking a reliable weather website or app like Weather Channel. Not super helpful. And this is where we're going to introduce to probably the most powerful primitive in AI right now. And this is this idea of function calling, of tools as we call them in the AI SDK. And I want to take a second just to explain what tools are in very simple terms. The problem that we have here is that the model has an incredible amount of training data, but is unable to access the outside world or access information that's happened outside of its training data. But the model is very good at this pattern recognition process and this ability to quote unquote reason, big quote unquote there. And what we do with tools is that we effectively give the model a list of capabilities. You can call them functions, tools, whatever you want to call them. And we describe what each of those tools would do. So in the case of weather, we'd say, okay, you have a get weather tool, and this tool you should use if the user ever asks to get the weather in a certain location. In order to use that tool, make sure that you have the location and the unit of temperature that you want. And what's going to happen is that as the model is going through the conversation, if it interprets or thinks that the user wants to get the weather, rather than returning a text response like it was doing before, it will return a function call, a tool call, and then it will pull out the exact tool or identify the tool that it wants to use, and then it will pull out those parameters that it needs to run, so like the location or whatever you defined beforehand. And then what the AI SDK is doing behind the scenes is it's pulling out that information, it's running that code in your environment, and then boom, the model has like run code or has executed a function that to achieve some kind of task. And so that's how tools work in a nutshell. And we're going to define our first tool here to get the weather in Kailua.
Sweet. Let's go. It's going to be fun. Yeah. So this is kind of what somebody is asking for. They're thinking about like agentic things and other stuff. So, kind of start with some of these tools to see kind of how they work in the SDK. And this is, for me, this is like a nice way of packaging all the information in a live stream. So if you're kind of digging this, definitely hit the thumbs up here if you're watching on YouTube. If you're on X, just share the stream with a friend, because this is going to be a great resource to kind of look back on. After the stream, I'm going to have an AI process actually going to go through and generate timestamps for us. And so that will be in the description below as well. So, yeah, thank you. And go ahead and let's go and get some weather up in here with some tools.
Let's get some weather. So this showcase is a really cool part of the AI SDK and this very considered API, in that every level of complexity that we move down builds upon the previous primitives or concepts that we're used to working with. So adding a tool to stream text is adding a new key to the stream text function. It's not approaching the way that you call the function in any different way. It's just now providing these tools to the model. So the way that we do that is we define this key, this tools key. This is a record or an object where you define the name of the tool. And then inside that tool, we're going to have to define a few things that we'll see in a second. Now, two important things to note here. One, the name of your tool is very important. Think of this as part of the description of the tool. So get weather is pretty clear about what this tool is going to use. So if the user asks, what's the weather in Kailua, even without a description of what the tool does, there's a fairly good likelihood that it's going to pick get weather to achieve the task. And the second thing is this tool utility function that we're importing from AI. We'll see this in a second. This is not necessary, but this, when we're going to define exactly what we require for this function to use, it means that when we define the function that gets called, we have full type safety between the two. So not necessary, but it helps. It gives you a better DX. So we defined our first tool. We are going to have to give it a description. So in this case, we want it to get the current weather at a location. This is what the model is going to use alongside the name of the tool to say, okay, hey, yeah, this is, I need to call this tool right now to solve this task. Then we have to define what it is that the model actually needs to run this function. And this is introducing, again, our best friend Zod so that we can define it in this type safe format, but also a cool little tip. And that is when you're looking at this off the bat, I'm sure based on how we already use this, we're not asking for the location. We're not asking for the weather in Kailua by providing the coordinates. We're saying, I want it in Kailua. But something cool, we can use the model's inference ability. And if we're using a sufficiently large model that likely has coordinates within its training data, it is able to infer things like latitude and longitude from the city without us actually ever having to provide some kind of like conversion function or anything like that. Now, use this, I'm going to say you need evals. We're not even going to talk about evals in this because we don't have the time, but like you're going to want to be careful with how you do this. But because this is a demo, I want to inspire you to play around with these parameters because it doesn't necessarily have to explicitly exist in the context the model has. The model can infer it from the context it has available to it. So remember, these parameters are what the model needs in order to run what's going to come next, which is the function that actually gets run when this tool is called. So if we scroll down, the last thing we're going to have to do is actually define that function. And what we have here is an actual call to a weather API. This is the Open Meteo API, where we're pulling in the latitude, longitude, and city. And then we are calling this API, passing in the latitude and longitude, getting out the current weather code. And then we are unwrapping it. And finally, we're returning the values that we want here.
That's
really
great.
Cool. Remember, in this execute function, this is just, again, a Node.js environment that you can run any code you want here. So we're literally calling a weather API and returning it. So with these, whatever it is, 10, 12 lines of code, the model now has access in a fairly, quote unquote, deterministic way to getting the weather in a certain location. Really powerful, this.
Wow.
So I'm going to copy this and we are going to update our route. Great, no errors here, thankfully. That's the beauty of kind of live coding, but kind of not. And if we ask the same question again, let's say, what's the weather in Kailua? We should see the weather, but we don't. And I've kind of alluded to why we don't see the weather here. And that's because the model isn't returning a content or like a response, it's generating a call. So we need to render that tool call in the UI. And the way that we can do that is by accessing what are called tool invocations within our front end. So I'm going to just replace this code here and we can walk through it very quickly. So remember, before we were just rendering the message content. In this case, we're checking if there are any tool invocations. And if there are, we're going to render the tool invocations in a stringified format in a pre-tag. Otherwise, we'll just render message content. And so if we save, I'm going to do it side by side so we can kind of see it pop up. If we save, we should see that tool call now show up. So we know that the result it's in, or the state that it's in right now, it's a tool result. We called the get weather tool. As you can see, like it pulled out successfully Kailua from the question. It also inferred the latitude and longitude, and then it got the temperature. I don't know if Ray, if you can Is it 26 degrees there?
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's like 2 degrees in London right now. I'm so jealous. I am so jealous.
For those like in
But
Fahrenheit,
yeah,
that should
like
probably be
the
around like
model has
78. Yeah.
sorry?
It's like I think that's around like 78 degrees Fahrenheit, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
70.
think,
Yeah.
let's see, 26 C,
Yeah, yeah.
78.8.
Yeah. It's
So
it's
yeah,
cold when it gets
the
under
model
74.
now has access to the weather in Kailua as part of its message history. So it's kind of simple what we just did, but a huge, huge shift of our model has now moved from being the do everything machine to really being this again, I'm putting in massive quotes, this reasoning machine. But you say, okay, these are a bunch of tasks that you're able to do. Here's deterministic code for these actual tasks, these tools, these execute functions, and then you pass it back into the context of the conversation, and the model's like pulling out whatever it needs to complete the next action. And so going back to I think it was Matichek's question before on agents, this is really the the format or the infrastructure that makes building agents with the SDK doable and really powerful. But I think we've seen an issue, which is the model hasn't actually told us what the weather is in Kailua. It just blurted this information out, and that's not a great user experience. Come
Right.
on, we're
Yes.
I'm at Vercel here. Like you can't that doesn't work.
We're trying to embody the Steve Jobs, you know.
Yeah, exactly. We're product obsessed, and so
Yes.
to take this to the next level, what we'd want to do is say have some logic on the back end or the front end to say, okay, you've received the tool result, it's done, send it back to the model alongside all of the previous context of the conversation to trigger another generation. And hopefully what's going to happen is the model's going to see, okay, the history of the conversation is the last two messages. Okay, I got a question, and then a tool call happened, then there was a tool result, and so I can infer from there that I can answer the original question using whatever results came out. And so the idea here is creating these multi-step flows where the model is able to decide, okay, I need to do more. I haven't fulfilled the request, the initial request. And this, as we were just talking about it, is kind of complicated to think about. Okay, when would you do it? How would you do it? What prompts sending something back? And what's awesome with the SDK is that enabling these multiple steps is as easy as adding a single configuration key to your useChat function. So if we head back to useChat, we're going to replace everything here. As we can see up here, we've just added this max steps. If I zoom in here, you can see we just added that max steps. If I save, we're going to refresh the page here, pull things out a little bit, and say, what is the weather in Kailua? We should see this tool result come in, and then we have it was so fast, but then the model took that information, said, okay, the weather is in Kailua is 26 degrees Celsius with humidity of 74%. So really cool. Like now the model is using that to complete the conversation and to complete the task. Now, a lot of people ask, I'm not going to get too into the weeds here, but what do you set max steps to? Why 5? Why all of this? This is something to play around with, but don't be super overwhelmed or overthink this value. This is thinking this will go into how you're architecting what tools you're providing to complete what tasks. But in this case, we literally just needed 2 steps to get to the outcome that we needed. If our model also had like get the itinerary in a place based on the weather, that would be 3 steps. But you could have collections of tools that are all doing different things and not necessarily need 50 steps to get somewhere, because you're only needing up to 3 or 4 steps max to complete a task. So that's the way to think about it. It's the maximum number of steps you would need to complete any given task based on the tools that you've provided.
That's fantastic.
So the last and the most exciting thing is how can we make this look better? And we're going to lean on. Sounds a little bit hacky, but it's really cool, and it's how a lot of this works behind the scenes. Is that at the end of the day, we're using tools to interact with the outside world. What are tools? They are JavaScript functions. They're functions that take in an input, return an output. What are React components? They are functions that take in an input and return an output. And so that's exactly really what we're going to be doing here is we're effectively going to be mapping tool calls and the input that they take to React components and the props that they take. And so in this way, we're going to define a React component that simply takes in as props temperature, weather code, humidity, and city. And we're going to say if the state of the tool call is result, render that component. So it's really as simple as that. So the way that we're going to do that in our UI, I've generated beforehand, surprise, surprise, with V0, a weather component that is going to, exactly as I just said, map through those tool invocations and say if the tool name is get weather and the state, if it's in a result state, render the weather component, pass in the result as the weather date. Otherwise, don't render anything. And so by doing this, let's copy this over. And again, we want to have the cool effect of seeing this change in real time. I'm going to wait. I'm going to not save yet. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So we're going to see this change before our eyes. If I save, we should see now this really that tool result rendered into a React component. And that's how you can approach generative UI in your applications, is really thinking about, okay, what information do I need to get? How do I get the model to get that? And then how do I pipe it through, map it to the component within my UI? So really cool. I have one more part to this that I'm happy to go through. I don't know if we want to do that first, or it's a very small part, but it's adding interactivity to these components so that it can then
why don't we just go through it, and then we could talk through it like after you put in the code or whatever you do, and kind of just kind of just, I know you move pretty fast, and then we can kind of walk through the what that looks like and stuff. Yeah,
let's do it. So the idea here is, and you can see this with many applications that you'd be using, like Claude or V0 or any of things like that. You have these components that are generated within messages, and they can have interactive elements in it. So in this case, like this is Kailua, this is talking about weather. We could probably add something here to say maybe a button that gets the weather in another location. Because this is a weather component, the action is likely to do with either Kailua or weather. But this allows us to add that interactivity to components, because at the end of the day, it's just a React component. There's nothing. This component is let's actually, we're going to open it in this step. I'm going to copy in this code so we can see what's happening. I'll zoom in. We have our weather component. In this weather component, we the props, that the interface for the props that are coming in. It takes in those props, and then it's literally rendering it's rendering different elements based on those components. There's nothing AI related about this component whatsoever. It's just the data that came in was sourced and called by a model. So I'm going to copy in this updated code, and we'll see. Oopsie.
wow.
I didn't the right.
So if someone is using V0, they can maybe copy in their Zod schema saying, hey, I have this data that comes back from my AI model. Can you build a weather component that will track these? Or you can even ask V0 to say, hey,
that's what I did.
Okay.
That's what I did for this component. I literally said, I want the Apple stock weather emoji, and I copied in my TypeScript type that was on the state. And in one shot, I got this component, and then I installed it, and then I had it as part of my chatbot. And
let's go.
This is the way that we think of generative UI, is that the model while not necessarily generating exactly the parts of the interface, it is literally showing components as without guidance. Like it's doing it in this agentic fashion. And what's really fascinating about this for a product design perspective, chatbots are really scary because when the model is generating text, like you don't know what it's going to give you. But as soon as you now say, okay, if I want the weather, this is how it should be presented in the UI. Not only is it more interactive, but we've now limited the risk of what the model is going to say back to the user, and this could be branded exactly how we wanted it.
Wow.
So
That's cool.
that's really cool. And then the last point that I'll mention on this, which is really cool, is because these are just React components, you can use your existing application components. So that means you have your existing design system, you have your existing registry of components. If you want to build a chatbot that is able to leverage and use all of this, you just make them available to the model via tools. And now you have this chatbot that is using your existing application interface to perform tasks that are coded directly into the components, but are now like presented on demand to the user as they ask for it. So this is, I think, a lot of where we're thinking about how generative UI can exist within applications is this almost like unified interface for using an application when you know exactly what you want to do. Change my credit card, like book a flight, whatever it may be. You don't want to be navigating around everywhere. You say, I want to go to Rome, and like you have that all sorted for you.
That's amazing.
Before I forget, I'll add this
Oh, yeah.
this very last part to the component. And what we're doing here to add interactivity is that we are first adding an ID to the useChat hook. And this allows us to, similar to how you do with React Query, you tag queries so that you can change them, invalidate them elsewhere in your application. By doing this, we can trigger subsequent messages to the conversation from other parts in our application without having to prop drill or have a context that we're sharing around our application. So the very last thing that we're going to do is head into that weather component. And I'm just going to replace it all here and show you what we've done. We have imported in useChat. We've called the useChat hook, passing in the same ID. And then we're destructuring the append method. And append is really cool because it allows you literally just to add a new message programmatically to the conversation. So in this case, I said we want the model to generate the weather in a random location. We can add a button with an on-click handler, have some component state, so we'll know whether it's clicked or not, just like any React component, and then use this append function to add a new message to the conversation saying the user said get the weather in a random location. So if I were to save this, head back to our thing and say get the weather in Kailua, Hawaii,
Oahu?
Oahu.
Yeah. That's cool that it actually clarifies. Nice.
So there's Oahu, and then or Kailua, Oahu, and then I click this button. You see the button state is there; it's clicked, and we've now got Sydney elsewhere in the conversation. But this button state is not clicked yet, and this one is. And so this is that. Remember, they're just components.
I see. Okay. Wow. So it just generates a new one with a new ID, and then it kind of interacts there. That way you can have them kind of separate.
Completely new component with different props in it, and it's a new instance of that component. So that was everything I wanted to run through.
Yes.
We can chat through that now. I also want to leave some time to talk about like our chatbot template, which is really insane. Like, also, before that, I want to shout out two people. I want to shout out Lars, who really is like the brains behind. If you want to follow him, as he pretty much ships stuff like every hour on what's changing, absolute machine, and responsible for like a lot of these really simple, incredible APIs. And then as we're going to go into in a second, Jeremy has built our the current iteration of our chatbot, which we'll look at in a second. And it's incredible both from design as well as it is a real proper like production implementation of a chatbot with we'll go into it in a second. But yeah, so that's kind of the demo. I guess I could stop here for some questions if there are any, or if you have any questions, and then we can go into the chatbot really quickly.
I think there's just so many gold nuggets to take in here as far as the depth that you've covered. And to me, this is like almost masterclass level of like, hey, this is just a getting started on the Vercel AI SDK, how deep it can go in managing interactions. And so the reason I think chatbots are popular is because it kind of shows you the randomness, like pulling a slot machine. You don't know what you're going to get. And so what's nice is how good of an example it can be used to, like you're saying, generate UI. But we can also do the same thing you're saying when you're saying React components. If you're not familiar with React or these types of things, think about all the stuff that you generate using V0. So instead of focusing on having generate this like massive app, just think about focusing on a small experience. So like he's saying, weather component. You know, if you wanted to have like if we want to add a drawer that comes down, so when you click the weather, it'll just show you like the week view for the weather. You can do that. You know, you can already have that data preloaded in the background. When you click it, it'll just reveal that at the background. Or you can say, I want to hover over the weather component and just have it reveal like the week view of the weather, just kind of like it does on iOS when you're scrolling. So if you think about it that way, so you don't have to think about things in a chatbot view form. You can just have this as like one specific page that loads on your phone. So when you see that there, you just, tap it like most people would, just because they're curious or they're scrolling. So as it scrolls, it just kind of animates this little drawer that slides out. And so those are kind of ways that you can think about them. So maybe start thinking about chunking your software down and delivering like those types of experiences, and then combine that with the AI SDK stuff, which can do tool calling and doing this other things to grab data. So it's really nice. And kind of what we saw visually here is that a lot of pre-processing, a lot of data, like extraction type of tools to get those things in to kind of feed the bottom of your pyramid. And towards the top of the pyramid is how the users will see it and interact with it. And as they're coming into the app, it just literally feels magical. And you can now unlock these experiences because we have this type of AI tooling available. So I think it's so cool to just that you're demonstrating this to have our minds go a little pretty wild. And if you have any questions, just definitely feel free to drop them right now in the chat. As far as like maybe what you're working on or things that you want us to talk about. But I definitely highly encourage you, anyone who's watching right now, to go check out the AI SDK. And it's a part of Vercel, but it's open source. I mean that you can pull it in. It doesn't cost you money to use it. You can deploy it anywhere you want, which is nice. And I think that's one of the key advantages of like something like Next.js as well, is that you can build with it. It's open source. You can deploy it anywhere you want. It's not that you have to pay for it at all. It's like you can use OpenAI as far as providers, Google, make up your own Olama and so forth, simply by calling the provider type of thing in. So it's an extremely powerful framework. And if you're someone who's prompting, you can use this video to go back as well to understand a little bit of how the basics of this works. So now that you know about something about structured data, Zod schemas, providers, you can just start using those keywords in your prompts to generate code for you to experiment and then say, hey, I have this data structure. I want to have a drawer that comes when I click the weather component and reveals a week view. And then just give that to V0 and then just let V0 cook and and see what it comes up with. And what's nice about V0, that's also a React component. So you click through and it interacts with you. It's just really kind of fun and magical. And that's kind of the joys of how you maybe want to think about some of these things. And that's the way that I'm thinking about these. It's like, okay, wow, like I'm just thinking about all these other app experiences. I'm just going to have to not rewrite, but just kind of rethink and challenge and push against the status quo. It doesn't all have to be chatbots, but this is just a way to demonstrate that for you because it's so flexible and so kind of, like you say, random. You don't really know what's coming up. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And as a reminder as well, like V0 is built and power. The AI SDK came as a byproduct of V0. It was literally pulling out abstractions that the incredible V0 team created, and so this is very much
Wow.
like in a similar way to how Facebook built React.
I see.
This is like our, I suppose, our equivalent relationship where everything that we build for the SDK where comes out of a need for it in V0, and so
Wow.
you know that these are every feature that's worked on and built is necessary in a real production application, a
Hmm.
real revenue generating production
That's right.
AI application, and one that we are really pushing to build to be one of the great AI businesses. So yeah, there's a lot of confidence in that.
Yeah. So as they're building, we're building in parallel, and this is your chance to ask questions and participate. So I definitely appreciate. What do we have here?
And yeah, I wanted to show off this. This is like an unbelievable open source chatbot template. This has been, let me see if I can get up on GitHub. I think this has 9.3 thousand stars on GitHub. This is, you can see this across a lot of like MVPs for startups as their starting point for building AI applications, in particular AI chatbot. And what we've got here is this starter chatbot template that uses all of our best practices from Next.js 15 to the SDK to this is using, it's got persistence, so Neon Postgres under the hood. I believe it's got, what else does it have? I mean, let's just look at it. It's got this awesome Gen UI examples here. So you can see this, what's the weather in San Francisco, pulling in. It's a much better version of my
Nice.
demo that we just did. We've got copy buttons,
Wow.
amazing toasts built in,
Thumbs up, thumbs
model
down.
switcher. Although
Oh, that's hot.
what's nuts about this model switcher and this whole thing built from the outset is, right, we're not logged in yet. So obviously we couldn't be using the more powerful model. So that's already built in. It's got auth built in with Next.auth 5. So I think I have an account set up with this. Let's see. Yep. So I'm now logged in. The most crazy part of this all is, one, we've got our amazing Shadcn sidebar. Gotta love it. But two, let's do 4.0 and let's have it draft an essay about Silicon Valley. And we'll see this canvas blocks artifact style
Oh my goodness. Oh wow.
UI, which is incredible, absolutely beautiful as well. You can have it. This is my favorite thing in all of it. We can have it give us suggestions, and just like the way that a user would leave suggestions, like Google Docs style, the model is literally tagging elements, providing a suggestion. I think because it hadn't finished, providing a suggestion. We can then apply that suggestion, and we can see it in the diff. It's like, and this is all editable as well. Like it is absolutely, if we turn off the diff,
For
this is
free. You can go to
editable.
GitHub and download
Saving
this.
changes. You see, like with the diff, I mean, it is, and you can also, because this is like this tandem experience, you can interact with it to say, okay, like remove, let's see if this works. I don't know. Remove the rise of the tech giants section. Let's see. I don't know. This is demo on the spot.
Wow.
And then if we look, yeah, like it's wild. It's absolutely wild. And so this
so
is all
beautiful.
open source. You can deploy it with one click. It's ready to go. And like I said, this has persistence built in. So like our chat is right there. Start a new chat. So this is an unbelievable starting point for anyone who's building with AI. And remember that this is built with the AI SDK. So it means that if you want to, this is using OpenAI, but if we wanted to use Anthropic, you switch out one line of code. It's properly mind blowing. It also looks unbelievable too. It really is.
Mind
It's
blown.
it's pretty incredible.
Yes, you can download this repo. We're going to have the repo resources and things available in the description for the YouTube, also for X. I'm going to post a separate thing. But this is also currently on GitHub. Just type in AI-chatbot, right?
And yeah, this is at chat.vercel.ai.
There we go. Whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
pretty
So I don't know if you
bonkers.
saw when he did the
Pretty
generate
bonkers.
the actual canvas thing, it animated in beautifully. It may have been
Yeah.
hard to see with my slow internet connection, but it just those little details when you click that little button at the very bottom, it kind of animates up. You know, there's those little things that it just takes a while to do. That's the whole point of open source. Like they put it out there, you can use it. You know, why redraw these animations and stuff? Just take that, add that to your app. You know, like you're saying, use that for your MVP. Wow, that is absolutely
It's
stunning.
it's it's an incredible starting point. It
Yes.
really it's wild. Um, so yeah, big shout out to Jeremy. Just rebuilt all of this very recently, and it's really incredible. Uh,
Yes, just
really incredible.
so beautiful. I had a somewhat like not technical, but how do you know in the AI SDK that you should be using like a route handler versus a server action? Is there a difference between the two? And you know, why should you use one over the other?
Good question. So if you're using any of the hooks that we have, so use chat, use completion, use assistant, that will be with route handlers. And they've just been designed to do that. One, because one of the things that you really need with AI, particularly with streaming, is like being able to abort streams in a lot of production applications. And unfortunately, at the moment, server actions don't support aborting streams yet. And so that's why a lot of that infrastructure is built on route handlers. But I think today's demo kind of showcases quite well when to use what, in that if you want singular uses of AI, like generating some text or generating an object, that's when you can reach for route handlers and use the SDK like any other asynchronous API you'd be calling. And don't think about it as API, as AI, sorry, just think about it as anything else you're working with. And then if you're building more of this chatbot style application and you're reaching for use chat, that's when you would go to route handlers or API routes.
Ah, okay, okay. That makes sense. So does it matter if it's streaming or not? Does that also make a difference?
No, for so we have examples um, of streaming. Where is it? Streaming with server actions. So you can effectively when you're generating. Let's see where the server action implementation is. So when you're this would be the server action here. I'd suggest, like, if you're dealing with streaming stuff, like streaming an object, for example, we have an awesome hook. Where is it? Basics, streaming. We have a really great hook called use object. If I get these comments out the way. So just like use chat, you pass it an API route, you give it a schema, and then you have this type safe object that you can use within your UI, just like just like you were just like we were doing before.
I see.
And then in the route handler, let's see where it is. Then you use stream object, and instead of returning a data stream response, you return a text stream response. You could do this with server actions as well, but this is like the ergonomics of for streaming. I kind of suggest using use object where you can, because it also gives you like a ton of niceties. So let's see if we can just see the use object documentation. This is it, right?
Yeah, it says
It gives
experimental.
you, it spits out things like it has an on finish function. So life cycle hooks for when it errors out, if it finish it when it's finishing. Um, it also gives you out like the actual error message and is loading like Boolean state, so that you can, a bit like React query, you don't have to think about managing these states yourself. It's just given for you out of the box.
And then the other question I had was more about like is there a difference on like the Edge runtime? Is that by default now with like Next.js 14 and later, or like timing of things? Because right now I'm using Google Gemini, and like if I send it over 100,000 tokens, it'll take like 50 seconds to resolve, or 55 seconds or more. So what do you suggest there? Or kind of what are some tips?
So you don't have to use the so on Vercel, Edge is not the Edge is only used for a middleware at the moment. So you can use like regular Node.js environment for your route handlers and for your actions. You use that like that max duration for extending out the maximum possible duration for those serverless functions. But my suggestion there is really, as much as you possibly can, simplify and break it into steps. In the same way that, like, if you were approaching yourself transcribing 100,000 lines of text, how would you go about doing it? You'd probably like first make an outline of who is talking, and then you'd use that outline to kind of like guide where you're going. Or it's just like chunking it into like individual portions where you're saying, okay, get the first summary for the first 10,000, first 10,000, first 10,000, and then get a summary of all of those together.
I
And
see.
what's cool about that is that you minimize the likelihood that it's going to fail, because your risk surface area, so to speak, or your error surface area is minimized. You're probably going to get a better generation as well. You might have some crossover between different places, but you could equally take, let's say you break it into 5 steps, say chunk the transcription into 5 steps. You could plug in each sequential summary. So like, this is the summary from the previous 20% of the conversation. And then you're just giving it that. And then you keep passing that. And as you're going, you get to a point where you've got a summary that is, I don't know, done in certainly less amount of time, even though it's more requests,
Hmm.
it's done in less time because the model needs less time to return a summary at
That's
each
right.
point. And
Yes.
then the other small nuance part about that, we talked a lot about Zod schemas today. You have to be really careful with letting those balloon out. So in my personal like hobby projects that I've built, I usually don't go beyond like 5 or 6 keys for any Zod schema, because beyond that, you start to, it gets hard. Like I have a lot of use cases where you're wanting to generate an array of objects, and at that point,
Hmm.
every incremental, like when we were adding language just to that Zod schema, that's now 7x whatever that incremental addition of complexity or latency that's happening as a result of that inference or computation that's happening. And so
Oh.
you have to be careful with that and be very considered, let's say.
Okay. Yeah, those are some really good tips because yeah, I'm building right now and kind of running into some of these problems, and it's like, oh, and like what should I be doing there, and what those steps are, and kind of what the best practices are. I'm really obsessed with this object generation type of stuff because that makes sense to me in my brain. If you think about it, everything's an object. That's a whole nother theory of things that you can get into, right? Like, what is a file system? What is a file? And then that type of stuff. So yeah, no, I think this is really just kind of mind blowing, and also appreciate everyone who's been kind of tuning in and be able to watch this stuff. And this whole live stream is recorded, so you'll be able to view this back on YouTube. So you're just going to be able to go back, and I'm going to have all the chapter markers set up so that you can go and study yourself and take a deep dive into this. I'm going to have some of the resources available. So we're going to have like the GitHub repo. And is this something that could also be made public? That little screen that you're showing with the generative text that shows the code and stuff? Is that?
Yes, I think what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be hosting a session where we go through all of it
Okay.
in the very near future.
Nice.
So I think like literally in 2 or 3 weeks.
Oh,
So I
perfect.
don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but early December we're going to be doing that live on stream, and in a
Sweet.
fashion where everyone can code along.
Oh, that's so cool.
alongside also the initial presentation, which we didn't go through today.
Ah, so yeah, that's amazing. So look here, folks, you got to get a sneak preview
Yeah, sneak
of
peek.
this whole interaction with my boy Nico. It's like all this fancy code stuff that we were doing here. You got a little bit of preview of that, and so you can use this video to kind of get your appetite wet and bring those questions in a couple of weeks as you're like building, just like the way I was. After that conference, I'm like, I need to implement this. I need to, really get in there and really truly understand, how the timings of these things work. And you're going to run into problems that you're going to have some problems with. So definitely feel free to reach out. And also, if you haven't had a chance to follow us on social media, you can just follow Nico at Nico ALBANESE10 at that's on X, right? And then at Ray Fernando 1337 there. I'm also my socials are also on YouTube, the same as X as well, where I'm also doing the streaming. So we're gonna have some of the comments there. We covered a lot today. It's just a huge amount of things. I also want to give a shout out to some of my members. So Hertzfeld Labs has become a member of the YouTube stream. So totally awesome with that. And also shout outs to Kat Wang, who is also a member. So definitely appreciate that. Also, everyone who's been chiming in and supporting. I have basically a thing called this a tier called Let Me Cook. It just literally just allows you to kind of comment. You'll have a little badge with your name next to it. And I'll have like some future sessions where I'll have like these, what I call the green room. So you can kind of hang out with us before the stream. And that'd be kind of cool to just kind of hang out and ask questions. You kind of feel like you're special as part of these streams because I'm just totally new to this streaming thing. And it's just been amazing to be able to connect with the community and post in public and share knowledge back with you as I'm learning, this SDK and stuff. And this stuff goes really deep, the powerfulness. And, big shout outs to the folks over at Vercel for letting me borrow Nico, and to have us talk on stream and kind of give us that cool inside baseball that has not yet been publicly available as far as like, this type of demonstration. So you have the opportunity today to go back and look through and reference these types of things to build your AI apps and stuff. Super awesome, man. Anything else you want to share at all?
No, just if you're interested, check out sdk.vercel.ai, our doc site. If you have questions, shoot me a DM on Twitter. And yeah, like I have fun, play around with it. It's seriously like this is the most fun I've had building in my entire life working with this stuff. It just I keep calling it a Mary Poppins API because you just ask it for stuff and keeps pulling it out. Like I don't know where it's coming from, but it works. And I really can't wait to see. We're already seeing some absurd applications being built with the SDK. So yeah, I can't wait to see what cliche, but I really cannot wait to see what people are building because it inspires me to figure out what we're going to be building next. So it's really cool.
Definitely very cool. And if anyone's been building anything that's really cool, definitely let me know on X, let me know on YouTube, and I'll be happy to share that back and retweet it out to everyone else. We've just crossed the 4,000 subscriber mark on YouTube. I've just crossed the 10K mark not too long ago on X. And so it's just really cool. Everyone else is building at the same time. I want to let people know, what you're building as well. And if you're interested in even coming onto the show, I'd love to feature you because I've been bringing on friends and just having these types of conversations that we do to show off some of this stuff is just really cool. And I want it to really feel like we're hanging out as friends. And just a little backstory is that I dropped out of school. I had a lot of problems like learning and these types of things. And I learned by doing. And I just have to get my hands dirty to do these types of things. And thank goodness for the advent of AI and these types of systems, because now what I used to do is just literally, like we're doing today, go into a developer's office and ask them, how do I do this? Or I'm trying to do this and help me understand. And so I learned basically my CS degree was just at Apple internally, talking and bugging these engineers in these off hours in the middle of the night, and I learned about, debugging, stack tracing, or like low level stuff, high level stuff, and shipping software. And so I feel like this is a really good opportunity for me to now kind of do this publicly and meet people like Nico and meet people like from the Vercel team, reach out and build a community together. So if you're interested in doing that, just definitely stick along, subscribe. Make sure you share this with some friends who are like-minded and can build together, because this is how we learn. Watching others build, seeing what people are doing, sharing those types of things, and what we can build here is just going to be really, really amazing. And if you're just getting started with AI, it is not too late to build. So this is probably the most golden opportunity that we have. And especially if you say, oh man, I'm a year late, I kind of missed this whole boat. Don't think that. You can start at any time. Just focus on a use case. Keep things as simple as possible. See if you can deliver an experience and kind of get really technical or detailed into that. And speaking of which, I'm actually going to be launching my app called Ray Transcribes. So it's raytranscribes.com. And so my goal is to launch next week. And I actually started off with the focus of just transcribing stuff from my YouTube videos to generate transcripts and text files. And it just so happens I accidentally made some of the fastest transcribing systems here by utilizing and learning about some system components. And it's like, oh, if you're reusing a device, I can utilize some of the bits on the device to do some cool stuff. And then since we're using the web, how much of the API can I use on the device to do media processing and these types of things? And so I can take an hour and a half video and then get it transcribed in like 30 seconds. And I haven't seen anyone using this type of facility like this, but it's going to become obvious once this becomes a thing. And once I ship this, as far as like how we do these types of things, how I'm using the SDK to, make these calls out, and just kind of work on these little details. So just obsessing over something small like that. Just going to focus really tiny, like on this tiny feature, making it really, really great so that, it's just so fast that you don't even really need a database. You could just reprocess it again because it's too fast. And I think it's going to be a really cool experience. So if you're interested in kind of following along the journey, I'll be posting about that as well. And, stay tuned next week because I'll have some more stuff that's dropping. And lots of really cool goodies. And I've been following Nico for a very long time, since like last year when I started getting started in my AI journey, and I saw this really great repo that came out called kirimasi.dev. And it's like it was just a way to bootstrap, your Stripe stuff and your databases and your authentication. And it was a really cool command line tool. I'm like, who is this guy? Like, who built this thing? Because it's absolutely cracked. The level of detail at every section of implementation was insane. And it's like, okay, who tackles this problem? And then who chooses to keep maintaining this? It's like, wow, you have like another level of understanding that I just don't have. But it taught me a lot about how these types of systems work. And, it's still out there. And now having joined Vercel, it's just really cool to kind of see you in this role, to kind of advocating, hey, there's a cool SDK here. It goes even deeper than what we can really understand. We're just literally scratching the surface as engineers and friends here. And it's pretty fun that we can be on this stream to share this passion with you and kind of give some of these examples because I'm really excited to build with this type of stuff. And I am actively building and learning at the same time and sharing stuff that I know. So, man, such a pleasure to get to chat with you. So cool.
Likewise, man. I enjoy every time I go through this kind of stuff. It feels like the first time. So I was very thrilled that you invited me to do this, and thank you. And I hope people learn something, and I hope to see some really cool new products being built.
Totally. Cool. So they could find you online on X. Also, if you take a look at the Vercel AI SDK, so you can just go ahead and do that. And what are some other websites that they can, or resources they can use to kind of find any information about how to get started or whatever things that we need to show them?
I think everything should be in our docs in terms of like we have a foundation section that links out to good resources for prompting, good resources for obviously learning Next.js, React, like that kind of thing. So that would be my suggestion of where to start if you're interested in that. We have guides there as well, quick start guides that take you from 0 to 1, as well as like some more in-depth guides if you're interested in RAG or multimodal chatbots or digging into the new computer use and
Very, very cool. Excellent. Cool, man. Well, yeah, thank you for joining the stream. I appreciate everyone who's been able to tune in. Huge shout out to Hertzfeld Labs and Kat, who are supporters of the stream as well. And if you want to be, there's a simple little subscribe button right there on YouTube. You can subscribe. That's for free. You can be a supporter if you want to and join in on the fun. So thank you very much, and stay tuned as we're going to have more goodies. And then maybe we see if we can have Nico back on the stream later on and see if we can kind of make some really fun custom UIs, or make some really fun apps with the AI. So drop whatever you want in the descriptions as far as what you want us to build next time. And maybe we'll just have just a straight up cooking session, throw some chill beats on and just literally just code, less explaining and just more coding, and just, shipping lots of software and little cool stuff really fast, just so you can witness the power of this type of thing from a really awesome developer and an awesome team over at Vercel. So shout outs to everyone who's been able to drop by. Huge shout out to Lee as well, who I got to see at the conference, and Guillermo and everyone else from the Vercel team. Jeremy, you guys, wow, Lars, dropping some gold nuggets for everyone. And so thank you very much. I'll catch everyone on the next stream, and I'll see y'all soon. Bye, everyone.